Before the Fellowship was the greatest story you've never heard. I'm Cameron. Dan, what's with your Elon Musk internet?
He's either being very still or he's frozen, but it could be either, really. He's a master of...
There, he's back.
I'm Greg.
Oh, oops, sorry. I was trying to fix I had my VPN on. I'm Dan.
Your VPN's all the way from Númenor, I guess.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, it said it was United States, but I don't know. I just switched it off.
Join us as we read and react to the Silmarillion by J.R.R. Tolkien. Last time we continued to Calabeth, the downfall of Númenor. As Ar-Pharazôn approached death, Sauron urged him to make war on the Valar and claim the land of the deathless. Amandil decided to sail into the west like Eärendil, his forefather, and seek the pardon of the Valar. He counseled Elendil to take any remaining faithful men and flee from Númenor before the outbreak of war. These men took with them their families and heirlooms, namely the 7 stones, and the sapling from the fruit of Nimloth the white tree. A great eagle-shaped cloud came out of the west. Ar-Pharazôn boarded his ship, Al-Carandus, Castle of the Sea, and he and the mighty fleet of Númenor disappeared into the western sea. Today we conclude a Calabeth, beginning on page 278 of the 2nd edition. But the fleets of Ar-Pharazôn came up out of the deeps of the sea and encompassed Avalone, and all the isle of Eressëa, and the Eldar mourned, for the light of the setting sun was cut off by the cloud of the Númenorians. And at last Ar-Pharazôn came even to Aman, the blessed realm, and the coasts of Valinor, and still all was silent, and doom hung by a thread. For Ar-Pharazôn wavered at the end, and almost he turned back. His heart misgave him when he looked upon the soundless shores and saw Taniquetil shining, whiter than snow, colder than death, silent, immutable, terrible as the shadow of the light of Ilúvatar. But pride was now his master, and at last he left his ship and strode upon the shore, claiming the land for his own, if none should do battle for it. And a host of the Númenorians encamped in might about Tuna, whence all the Eldar had fled. Then Manwë upon the mountain called upon Ilúvatar, and for that time the Valar laid down their government of Arda. But Ilúvatar showed forth his power, and he changed the fashion of the world, and a great chasm opened in the sea between Númenor and the deathless lands, and the waters flowed down into it, and the noise and smoke of the cataracts went up to heaven, and the world was shaken. And all the fleets of the Númenorians were drawn down into the abyss, and they were drowned and swallowed up forever. But Ar-Pharazôn the king, and the mortal warriors that had set foot upon the land of Aman, were buried under falling hills. There it is said that they lie imprisoned in the caves of the forgotten until the last battle and the day of doom. But the land of Aman and Eressëa of the Eldar were taken away and removed beyond the reach of men forever. And Andor, the land of gift, Númenor of the kings, Elena of the star of Eärendil, was utterly destroyed. For it was nigh to the east of the great rift, and its foundations were overturned, and it fell and went down into darkness, and is no more. And there is not now upon earth any place abiding where the memory of a time without evil is preserved. For Ilúvatar cast back the great seas west of Middle-earth, and the empty lands east of it, and new lands and new seas were made, and the world was diminished. For Valinor and Eressëa were taken from it into the realm of hidden things. In an hour unlooked for by men this doom befell. on the 39th day since the passing of the fleets. Then suddenly fire burst from the Meneltarma, and there came a mighty wind and a tumult of the earth, and the sky reeled, and the hills slid, and Númenor went down into the sea, with all its children and its wives and its maidens and its ladies proud, and all its gardens and its halls and its towers, its tombs and its riches, and its jewels and its webs and its things painted and carven, and its laughter and its mirth and its music, its wisdom and its lore, they vanished forever. And last of all the mounting wave, green and cold, and plumed with foam, climbing over the land, took to its bosom Tar Miriel the queen, fairer than silver or ivory or pearls. Too late she strove to ascend the steep ways of the Meneltarma to the holy place, for the waters overtook her, and her cry was lost in the roaring of the wind. But whether or no it were that Amandil came indeed to Valinor, and Manwë hearkened to his prayer, by grace of the Valar, Elendil and his sons and their people were spared from the ruin of that day. For Elendil had remained in Rhomenna, refusing the summons of the king when he set forth to war, and avoiding the soldiers of Sauron that came to seize him and drag him to the fires of the temple. He went aboard his ship and stood off from the shore, waiting on the time. There he was protected by the land from the great drought of the sea that drew all towards the abyss, and afterwards he was sheltered from the first fury of the storm. But when the devouring wave rolled over the land and Númenor toppled to its fall, then he would have been overwhelmed and would have deemed it the lesser grief to perish. For no wrench of death could be more bitter than the loss and agony of that day. But the great wind took him, wilder than any wind that men had known, roaring from the west, and it swept his ships far away, and it rent their sails and snapped their masts, hunting the unhappy men like straws upon the water. 9 ships there were, 4 for Elendil, and for Isildur 3, and for Anarion 2, and they fled before the black gale out of the twilight of doom into the darkness of the world, and the deeps rose beneath them in towering anger, and waves like unto mountains, moving with great caps of writhen snow, bore them up amid the wreckage of the clouds, and after many days cast them away upon the shores of Middle-earth. And all the coasts and seaward regions of the western world suffered great change and ruin in that time, for the seas invaded the lands, and shores foundered, and ancient isles were drowned, and new isles were uplifted, and hills crumbled, and rivers were turned into strange courses. Elendil and his sons after founded a kingdoms in Middle-earth, and though their lore and craft was but an echo of that which had been ere Sauron came to Númenor, yet very great it seemed to the wild men of the world. And much is said in other lore of the deeds of the heirs of Elendil in the age that came after, and of their strife with Sauron that not yet was ended. For Sauron himself was filled with great fear at the wrath of the Valar, and the doom that Eru laid upon sea and land. It was greater far than aught he had looked for, hoping only for the death of the Númenorians and the defeat of their proud king. And Sauron, sitting in his black seat in the midst of the temple, had laughed when he heard the trumpets of Ar-Pharazôn sounding for battle, and again he had laughed when he heard the thunder of the storm. And a third time, even as he laughed at his own thought, thinking what he would do now in the world, being rid of the Edain forever, he was taken in the midst of his mirth, and his seat and his temple fell into the abyss. But Sauron was not of mortal flesh, and though he was robbed now of that shape in which he had wrought so great an evil, so that he could never again appear to the eyes of men, never again appear fair to the eyes of men, yet his spirit arose out of the deep, and passed as a shadow and a black wind over the sea, and came back to Middle-earth and to Mordor. That was his home. There he took up again his great ring in Barad-dûr, and dwelt there, dark and silent, until he wrought himself a new guise, an image of malice and hatred made visible. And the eye of Sauron the Terrible few could endure. But these things come not into the tale of the drowning of Númenor, of which now all is told. And even the name of that land perished, and men spoke thereafter not of Elena, nor of Andor the gift that was taken away, nor of Númenor on the confines of the world, but the exiles on the shores of the sea, if they turned towards the west in the desires of their heart, spoke of Marnu Falmar that was whelmed in the waves, a Calabeth the downfallen, a Talante in the Eldarin tongue. Among the exiles, many believed that the summit of the Meneltarma, the pillar of heaven, was not drowned forever, but rose again above the waves, a lonely island lost in the great waters, for it had been a hallowed place, and even in the days of Sauron none had defiled it. And some there were of the seed of Eärendil that afterwards sought for it, because it was said among lore masters that the far-sighted men of old could see it from the Meneltarma, a glimmer of the deathless land. For even after the ruin, the hearts of the Dúnedain were still set westwards. And though they knew indeed that the world was changed, they said, Avalone is vanished from the earth, and the land of Aman is taken away. And in the world of this present darkness they cannot be found. Yet once they were, and therefore they still are, in true being and in the whole shape of the world as at first it was devised. For the Dúnedain held that even mortal men, if so blessed, might look upon other times than those of their body's life. And they longed ever to escape from the shadows of their exile, and to see in some fashion the light that dies not. For the sorrow of the thought of death had pursued them over the deeps of the sea. Thus it was that great mariners among them would still search the empty seas, hoping to come upon the isle of Meneltarma, and there to see a vision of things that were. But they found it not. And those that sailed far came only to the new lands, and found them like to the old lands, and subject to death. And those that sailed furthest set but a girdle about the earth, and returned weary at last to the place of their beginning. And they said, all roads are now bent. Thus in after days, what by the voyage of ships, what by lore and starcraft, the kings of men knew that the world was indeed made round, and yet the Eldar were permitted still to depart and to come to the ancient west and to Avalone, if they would. Therefore the lore masters of men said that a straight road must still be for those that were permitted to find it. And they taught that while the new world fell away, the old road and the path of the memory of the west still went on, as it were a mighty bridge invisible that passed through the air of breath and of flight, which were bent now as the world was bent, and traversed ill men which flesh unaided cannot endure, until it came to Tol Eressëa, the lonely isle, and maybe even beyond, to Valinor, where the Valar still dwell and watch the unfolding of the story of the world. And tales and rumors arose along the shores of the sea concerning mariners and men forlorn upon the water who, by some fate or grace or favor of the Valar, had entered in upon the straight way and seen the face of the world sink below them, and so had come to the lamplit quays of Avalone, or verily to the last beaches on the margin of Aman, and there had looked upon the white mountain, dreadful and beautiful, before they died. In summary, Ar-Pharazôn at last reaches the shores of Aman. Eru Ilúvatar himself shows his power and changes the world. A great chasm forms between Aman and Middle-earth, and all of Númenor, along with her fleets, are swallowed up in it. Ar-Pharazôn and his men are buried beneath falling hills. Amandil and his sons escape the cataclysm and establish kingdoms on Middle-earth. Sauron falls into the abyss, but not being mortal flesh, his spirit returns to Mordor, and he takes up his one ring, now unable to take form fair to men. The entire earth is changed by the power of Ilúvatar. Some lands are destroyed, new islands appear, river courses are changed, and most importantly, the world is made round and Aman hidden away. Sailors who seek it in the west find themselves back where they started. Yet because the elves were still permitted to leave Middle-earth and come to Aman, it is believed that there is a straight way that does not bend with the earth and leads to Tol Eressëa and Aman, but the way is shown only to those permitted to find it. Narrow is the way that leads to life, and there are few who find it. Amen. Wow, this is epic. This is like the disaster movie of the Silmarillion.
To be honest, it feels more like a proper ending than the ending of Quenta Silmarillion. It's
Right.
kind of like I don't know, something final about this in a way.
And this is, so the fact that Amandil escapes, is that why there exists elves and men on Middle-earth? Do they come from Amandil, or are there other...
There's wild men on Middle-earth. And then there's... Yeah, I guess the elves must...
The elves are still there, yeah.
I see.
Like
Which faction of elves
Galadriel
stayed?
and stuff, some of the
Yeah.
Noldor that stayed there. Because
Right.
they're some of them have returned to Aman after the War of Wrath, but some are still there.
So then, from Amandil's descendants comes Aragorn, right?
Right.
Yeah, that would make sense.
Yeah, he's like
'cause he
part of the
survived.
line of Dunedain.
That survived. Cool. What
Yeah.
a cool reading.
Yeah, it makes sense of like that sort of nobility, like in Lord of the Rings, at least the films and in the books, you get the impression like, okay, there's like a line of men that are somehow they've got like some kind of
They're
divine,
better. Just say
divine
they're better.
blood in them. Yeah,
Yeah,
they've
they're
got
better than us.
They're
We're just-
British.
We're just the proletariat,
Probably shouldn't go down that road of the joking about. I was going to continue the joke and
Okay.
realize I should not.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of pretty
I
much
was
every
interested-
page of mine's just highlights.
I was interested in. I wanted to read and reread how there's like a visual way that Tolkien describes. Okay, the world is round, so he was, Middle Earth was a flat Earth, interestingly, and then it was globe. But the way he describes how if you find the narrow way, he had an interesting way of describing it. Here it is. It's at the bottom of 281. While the new world fell away, the old road and the path of the memory of the West still went on, as it were a mighty bridge invisible that passed through the air of breath and of flight.
Wait.
Wait, no, it's not. It's like the world falling away. Where is that? So this is like almost the very last line.
Yeah.
Seen the face of the world sink below them, and so had come to the lamplight quays of Avalone. So it's like, I guess the way I'm imagining it, you're on this globe, and then you start to realize, because the world starts to sink below you, that you're like a bridge. You can imagine a bridge kind of laying across a globe, and it's like, as you move across that bridge, the globe is like further and further below you. Mm-hmm. You kind of found this like The Last Crusade, that invisible bridge that Indiana Jones walks across. Kind of interesting.
Yeah.
Another interesting thing that's stuck out to me was how Elendil was saved by a great wind, which is obviously reminiscent of Manwë. It roared from the west and swept his ships up. Basically, rescued him from the great chasm.
That's a good point. I don't know if I would have remembered that Manwë is associated with the air and the wind.
This is also...
Speaking of
go
that,
ahead.
Well, speaking of that, that harkens back to the music of the Ainur again. We're kind of thinking again about ways that the world has changed and that Morgoth's
Theme.
Yeah, his theme is kind of like this chaos that's reshaping the world and having these effects.
And now Ilúvatar uses that chaos to build something new. And Manwë is a part of that with the Great Wind. That's cool. It's also interesting that this is the moment, Sauron falling into the chasm where he loses the ability to be a hot young man, a heartthrob, and he has to, he can appear in a physical form, but he can't appear fair. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did it talk about that somewhere else as well, or am I getting confused with... Wasn't that in the previous chapter, though? Didn't we already read about that?
There may have been like an allusion to this moment or something before.
Yeah,
you might also be confusing it with the Revenge of the Sith when Anakin falls into the lava.
That is a possibility.
Yeah.
Or the Dark Knight when Two-Face gets his face burnt. It's kind of the same thing.
That's what it was.
It could be that.
That's what we all were thinking about.
That's probably how it was too. Like he still has his nice face. It's just half of it's burnt off. So don't want to show that to just anybody. Yeah. Well, okay. This is a little quick point, but I thought this was super interesting. Ar-Pharazôn and all of his men go to Aman, and they actually do make it to the shores of Aman. Right. And when the world is changed and shaken, they're buried under falling hills. This is the top of 279. It says, "There it is said that they lie imprisoned in the caves of the forgotten until the last battle and the day of doom."
It's terrifying.
I'm wondering, is it because they're mortal men, and even though they're from Númenor, who live a long time, they're still mortal, but they're kind of like in the land, the deathless land. So maybe since they're there in Aman, they're like,
they don't die.
They don't die.
Yeah.
But they're just trapped under rubble or something.
I think that's right.
They're just like, it's like this terrible punishment for their pride, to just be, they made it, but they just, they got in a sense what they asked for to make it to Aman, but in the worst way.
Yeah, that's a good insight.
In a way, it reminds me. Go ahead, Ken.
They're there till the end of time. That's all. I was just going to underscore what Greg was saying.
Yeah, there's something reminiscent about it for the undead army that Aragorn awakens. I actually don't know their connection to this story, but they are connected to this story, aren't they?
I don't think so.
I think it's probably some unfinished tale or something. There was some round that, the Gondor army did not come to the aid of. Was it Rohan that they didn't come to the aid of, or was it just men? I don't know.
I'm not sure. Yeah.
The other thing that I noticed, I thought was pretty interesting. This is the middle of 279. It describes Númenor going down into the sea, And the thing that struck me was that everything it describes, it's all the good things about Numenor. Like, in a sense, everything that was wrong with it was already gone because the Ar-Pharazôn and his sect of people went off to battle to fight the Valar. So it's like the children and the maidens and, well, I guess I don't know, and then in the gardens and the halls and the towers and the jewels and the laughter and mirth and music and wisdom and lore. It's like all these really good things. And so it just captures, it's not just like a, it's like the Lord makes the sun shine on the good and the wicked, like the punishment for the pride of the Númenóreans was for everybody. And on 280, it highlights this again. It says, the top of 280 says, no wrench of death could be more bitter than the loss and agony of that day. Mm-hmm. Like he's acknowledging that it's a true tragedy that so much good that was in the world is lost forever, vanishes forever. And so I don't know, my question, I guess, for you two is, how do you like, suppose you were Ilúvatar in this story. How do you like judge properly? How do you, this is part of the punishment or the reaction to the pride of Ar-Pharazôn. And, how do you go about discerning, okay, this is a just punishment, this is an unjust punishment?
Well,
where's the limit?
It would come back to that. That's a great question. I think it would come back to the themes of the music in the very beginning, because, okay, we have Morgoth, or at the time, Melkor's theme, weaving discord. And it gets to a point that we see now that theme includes Ar-Pharazôn, lusting after the land, coming to the land, and if left if it's not dealt with, that theme goes on, and reaps some kind of disastrous result that we don't know. But I guess we just see that Ilúvatar had to intervene because the theme would have been more evil than the loss of Númenor. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's kind of impossible to say what the limit is, because we'd have to see the whole theme, right?
That's right. You have to know every detail. Like, in our limited scope, we can't really know the details.
Because the Valar understood their theme, and they didn't understand much of others' themes. They just had their part to play. So even like a Manwë can't really see the extent of an Ar-Pharazôn and where it's going to lead. Only Ilúvatar would see that.
I saw Andy today, former guest of this very podcast, and we were talking a little bit about games and complexity and stuff, right? And I mean, none of us here is a fan of like the card game War, because it's just variance. There's no skill, right? You just flip a card and see who wins. And the more complex the game, the harder it is to even determine if the move you made was good. Like, if there's so many moving parts, it's hard to even quantify, okay, this particular choice I made benefited me X amount 7 turns later. Like, it's like you can have a general sense of like the directionality, like that helped me or it hurt me, but it's really hard to quantify with precision in such a complex game. We were talking about some game that he likes called, I think it's like On Mars or something, that he said people criticize for being too complicated, but it's like impossible for us, even when we make good tactical decisions, to really understand the full implications of that decision when there's so many moving parts.
I would say as well, if I'm coming through, the gift of Ilúvatar to man is death and their mortality. So it's not like, I mean, we don't know what Ilúvatar does after death to man, but we know that it's his gift to him, and therefore the final say there is not just doom, but a fulfillment of that gift.
Good point. Yeah, that's a good point. Kind of reminds me, it was much earlier in the book, but it said something like, it was some age of like prosperity for some group of elves or something, and it said like there are no stories told of that time because stories are only told when the good things are lost,
Mm-hmm.
And there's something kind of interesting about that part of what we're reading here is this longing in the Dunedain for what was lost. They know that far to the west, Aman lies beyond their reach, and they know that Númenor was this, beautiful island with an earthly paradise, really, right? And it's been lost now. And so then they sing the songs about it, and they share the lore, right?
It'd be interesting to do a word search in the Silmarillion for words like sorrow and mourning. And I think it's a pretty big part of the subject matter.
On the note of Ilúvatar, it's interesting to me that so much evil has happened that seems really bad. Like in the previous reading, Sauron creating this like crazy cult where they're like sacrificing people, on this altar. But he doesn't change the world. He doesn't like break the world until Ar-Pharazôn and his host come on to Aman, or Arda, I mean. And it's interesting to me that at that moment it was like, I don't know if it was the straw that broke the camel's back, or if it was like you've drank or you've tasted forbidden fruit, and it's like the world cannot be the same anymore. It's just so interesting how cataclysmic that decision from Ar-Pharazôn was. It was like it doomed so many things.
Right.
So I this might be too much in the weeds for what Tolkien was trying to communicate, but on that point, like Ilúvatar doing this, is it a direct cause and effect? You did this, therefore I will show my power and change the fashion of the world, and cause a chasm, or is it just that it's happening? I mean, it's providence in action, but is it a direct response from the viewpoint of Ilúvatar, who I'm assuming is an infinite being outside of time? You see where I'm going with this? It's like providence is, at least the Christian understanding, is something that's mysterious, and it belongs to an infinite being that has its own goodness and will that we can't understand. So the only way to talk about it is in time and by way of analogy, or by way of...
Well, there is cause and effect. There is like a nation does something and God judges the nation. There is like that's a consistent theme. And in this case, what happens is they go on the shores, and then Manwë calls upon Ilúvatar. The Valar lay down their government of Arda, so they're just waiting for Ilúvatar's word. And then Ilúvatar initiates DEFCON 12 and just destroys everything. So it seems like it was caused by, Manwë calling upon Ilúvatar because they have come onto the shores, the forbidden shores.
Yeah, he's more like a character. He's more like an actual agent, a character that is affecting the world from within.
Right.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, obviously, this is a story, and
Well, I was trying to go back to earlier in Akalabeth where it describes the ban for where the Númenóreans can't go, out of the sight of Númenor, and it doesn't specifically say. I mean, the Valar don't like give a specific punishment or anything like that, but it is a ban, and they know it, and it's not even to go to Aman. The ban is to sail so far from Númenor that they lose sight of it. And they can see on clear days Avalone, which is on Tol Eressëa, the city, but they can't even see Valar from where they are. But I think that forbidden fruit thing is kind of a good analogy, I suppose, because there is a cause and effect there, right? It's a consequence. It's the wage, right? The wage of sin is death. And so in a sense, like the breaking of this ban, it's the proper wage. It's just this cataclysm of it's no longer possible to keep Aman in Middle-earth or accessible through Middle-earth. It has to be like removed now or something like that. I don't know.
It reminds me of the, the Garden of Eden, how they eat the forbidden fruit, and then the Lord, in order to stop them from eating from the tree of life, he kicks them out of the garden because it would be terrible for them to be broken, by eating the fruit and to persist the tree of life and to continue living. So there's a similar thing with Ar-Pharazôn coming onto the deathless shores, but evil then would be on the deathless shores.
Right.
So maybe that's a clearer analogy in our faith. Is it was to pluck Arda out of the world and preserve it. It seems like.
Yeah, it's
Dan,
super interesting. Thoughts? Well, my thoughts were just like it's more speculative of like what would have happened had they not have set their feet on the forbidden land, would we not have these sort of like creation of Middle-earth, and would we not have hobbits? I don't know,
would Sauron have ruled more like Morgoth, showing forth his might and not created a ring because he had to be more subtle with the ring? I'm not sure.
Yeah, so it's definitely interesting.
One other thing, so Meneltarma, which is the place that they would do worship in Númenor, it's believed that was not drowned forever, and it's somewhere in the seas. So it's in 281.
As a pillar, right? It was a.
It's called the Pillar of Heaven, okay. But it's like I think it's an unroofed kind of temple. Okay. Which is a place of worship. So it's interesting that is somewhere in the seas, it seems like.
Yeah.
A lonely island lost in the great waters.
I thought it was interesting that it said it was undefiled still. Because didn't Sauron in his death cult do like human sacrifices in there?
Oh, oops.
To the darkness. But I mean, it's interesting. Like,
well,
in a sense, it's like, well, that's just like, I mean,
there's Garden of Eden kind of vibes there too. Because I mean, that wasn't destroyed; it's still there somewhere, and the worst sin possible was committed there, and it's undefiled. It's still a place of goodness.
Mm-hmm.
I think he probably used the word defiled too. Like that rings a bell. Like Sauron defiled that place. And now it's in the days of Sauron, none had defiled it. I wonder if it's the difference between kind of a moral evil that happens versus like a destruction of it. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe.
Like it was.
All right,
preserved.
should we?
You froze again. Check out our YouTube channel so you can see Dan's face when he's frozen.
Yeah.
It's
a spectacle. Very peaceful right now.
Yeah. If you like what you hear, go ahead and rate us 4 Razans out of Ar-Pharazôn. That is not a good joke. That was like the second time I've done that. 3 Silmarils out of 3. Follow us everywhere at Before the Fellowship. We have a Discord channel. Link is in the description. Join the discussion. We need some more life in there, people. Come bring life. And send any comments or questions to beforethefellowship@gmail.com. Join us next week as we read the greatest story you've never heard, The Silmarillion by J.R.R. Tolkien.